The wind did not knock in the Montana high country. It attacked. It screamed across the frozen valley like a starving animal, tearing at Clara Barrow's cabin as if it meant to rip the roof clean off and scatter her life into the snow. The fence line groaned. The lean-to rattled. The world beyond her door was nothing but white fury and hunger. Clara stood in it anyway. Her hands were raw, split open from cold and work. At 32, she should have still looked young. But grief and winter had carved her face into something older, harder. She hammered a spike into the fence post, fighting to hold the rail steady as the wind tried to wrench it from her grip. Since Amos died, the land had not given her a single easy day. 3 cows were already frozen stiff in the north pasture. Half a sack of flour remained in the bin. 2 chickens scratched inside the small lean-to beside the cabin. That was all she had left. Then came the sound. A sharp, panicked squawking split through the wind. Clara dropped the hammer and ran through knee-deep snow toward the lean-to. "No," she breathed. "Not you too." A gray blur shot out from behind the coop, white feathers hanging from its jaws. A coyote, rib bones showing through thin fur. Starving. Desperate. Just like her. It tried to scramble over a drift, but sank. Clara did not hesitate. She grabbed the greener shotgun from beside the cabin wall. The metal burned her fingers through her gloves. She did not aim. She pointed. The blast shattered the frozen silence. The coyote folded into the snow, red blooming against white. Clara stood there breathing hard, smoke curling from the barrels. She retrieved the dead hen from the snow. It was still warm. The land had taken her husband. It had taken her cattle. It would not take her last bit of food. Inside the cabin, she plucked the chicken in silence. The smell of singed feathers filled the small room. She fed the fire. The wind clawed at the logs. Then the pounding came. Not a polite knock. A heavy, dull thud against the door. Clara froze. No one came here. The nearest neighbor lived 12 miles east. Traders avoided this pass after the first snow. The only man who had ever come uninvited before had been Amos, stumbling home drunk and mean. The shotgun was already loaded on the table. She picked it up. "Who's there?" Her voice sounded rough from too many silent days. A pause, then a single word, low and broken. "Shelter." Clara moved to the window and wiped frost from the glass. He was enormous, a mountain of a man wrapped in furs, stiff with ice. He leaned heavily against the doorframe. Even in the fading light, she could see the dark frozen stain spreading across his shoulder and side. Blood. He looked more animal than human. Hair matted, beard thick, face carved by weather and pain. "Go away," she said flatly. "I've got nothing." "Don't need nothing," he rasped. "I'll trade." She almost laughed. "Not interested." He staggered but caught himself. His eyes drifted to the thin ribbon of smoke rising from her chimney. He looked at it like a dying man staring at heaven. "One night," he said. "Just the floor, till the storm breaks." I said no. She raised the shotgun where he could see it. The man grunted. With his good arm, he dropped a heavy pack into the snow. He fumbled with the straps, stiff and shaking. Then he pulled out a bundle of dark skins. 10, he said. He threw them at the door. Prime beaver. Tanned. 10 pelts for the floor. One night. Clara stared at them. Thick. Perfect. Dark as river mud. 10 pelts could buy flour for a year. Feed. Powder. It could pay the land tax Amos had left hanging over her head. A man would only offer that much, if he believed he would die without it. She looked back at him. He was dying. Fear coiled in her stomach. Amos had taught her what a man inside her cabin meant. Noise, pain, taking. The silence since his death was the only thing she truly owned. But this stranger was swaying on his feet, not a threat, not in this state, just a corpse waiting for cold to finish what blood had started. "Just the floor," she said sharply. "You try anything, I'll shoot you where you stand." "Just the floor," he agreed. She unbarred the door. The wind blasted inside, carrying ice and snow and the smell of pine and old blood. He stumbled across the threshold and collapsed near the hearth, breathing in ragged pulls. Up close, he was even bigger, broad shoulders, heavy hands, younger than she first thought beneath the grime. He didn't look at her. He curled toward the fire like a wounded animal. Clara barred the door again. Her cabin felt smaller now, crowded, dangerous. She cooked her chicken broth and ate standing, the shotgun within reach. He did not move. When night came, she laid her thinnest quilt on the dirt floor 6 feet from him. "That's yours," she said. He opened pale gray eyes clouded with fever, nodded, crawled onto the quilt with a groan. Clara climbed into her narrow cot without undressing. The shotgun lay beside her hand. The wind screamed outside. Inside, there were only 2 sounds: the endless howl of winter and the harsh, wet breathing of the stranger who had traded 10 furs for 1 night. Sleep did not come. She watched him in the firelight. Sometime after midnight, he began to whisper. "Not again," he muttered. "Let him go." He thrashed once, pain ripping through his wounded shoulder. A choked cry escaped him. This was not the angry sleep of a drunk man. This was the sound of someone being hunted. Clara sat upright, the shotgun resting across her lap. She did not move toward him, but she did not push him out either. When dawn's gray light touched the window, she rose. The fire had burned low. The stranger had not moved. He was too still. Clara stepped closer and pressed her hand to his forehead. He was burning, a dry, searing heat that spoke of infection deep in the wound. She looked at the pelts, then at the man. He had paid for 1 night, but something told her this storm was not breaking anytime soon. The storm did not break. It tightened its grip. The wind howled for 2 more days, sealing the cabin off from the world like a coffin buried under snow. Clara stood over the stranger, her hand still resting against his burning forehead. He was dying. She could drag him outside, leave him in the drift, keep the 10 pelts and survive the winter. That would be the smart choice. But she had seen too much death already. She moved. She melted snow over the fire. She pulled out her sewing box. From the small chest under her cot, she took the last of Amos's whiskey. When she peeled back the frozen furs from his shoulder, the smell hit her hard. Rot. The wound was swollen and blackened. The shirt beneath it was glued to flesh with dried blood. "This is going to hurt," she said quietly. She soaked a rag in hot water and whiskey and pressed it against the wound. The man screamed. His eyes flew open wild and unfocused. His good hand clamped around her wrist like iron. She did not pull away. "You're infected," she said steadily. "You hold still, or you lose the arm." He stared at her through fever and pain. For a long moment, she thought he might strike her. Then his grip loosened. She cut the shirt away. The bullet was still inside, lodged deep against bone. "This part's worse," she warned. She poured whiskey straight into the wound. He roared, his body arching off the floor, but he did not fight her. He gripped the quilt and endured it. Clara heated the knife in the fire until the blade glowed. Her hands were steady. She had stitched cattle before. Horses, too. A man was not so different. She cut. He passed out before she dug the flattened lid free. She cleaned the wound, packed it with the last of her salve, and stitched him closed with fishing line. When she finished, her hands began to shake. She wrapped the shoulder in clean strips, torn from her own bedding. "You owe me more than 10 furs now," she muttered. For 2 days, she forced broth and willow bark tea between his lips. The fever raged, then broke, then rose again. On the 3rd morning, his eyes opened clear. He stared at the bandage, then at her. "You dug it out," he rasped. It was festering. He tried to sit, managed it with effort. "Why?" he asked. "You paid for 1 night," she replied without looking at him. "The rest is interest." His gaze moved slowly around the cabin, the worn table, the patched walls, the way she handled the shotgun without fear. "Your fence is still down," he said. "I know. And that roof corner won't hold another storm. It'll hold." "No," he said simply. "It won't." He shifted his weight, testing his strength. "I'll fix it." She raised an eyebrow. "You can barely stand." "I'll be standing tomorrow." There was no boast in his voice, just fact. "You fix the fence," she said. "You stay till you heal. Then you go." Done. His name, she learned later, was Elias. He spoke little, but he worked. Even weak and pale, he stepped into the snow and began resetting posts, digging through frozen ground with his good arm. He did not complain. He did not curse. He just worked. Clara watched from the window. He mended her world piece by piece. Thud, thud, thud. The steady rhythm of hammer against nail. It was work Amos had promised to do for years and never had. Inside the cabin, silence settled between them. Not the empty silence of loneliness, a different kind. One night, with the storm howling again, Clara heated water to wash. She hung the old quilt across the corner of the cabin for privacy. Behind it, she stripped and stepped into the tin tub. The air was thick with smoke and tension. Through the flicker of firelight, she could see his shadow on the cloth. He was sitting upright, watching. She froze. This was the moment she knew too well. The moment when a man decided to take what he believed was his. She waited. Nothing happened. He did not rise, did not speak, did not move. He simply watched her shadow, not with hunger, with restraint. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her arms and unpinned her hair. It fell down her back. She washed in silence, her shadow stretching across the cloth. She was testing him, testing herself. When she stepped out and pulled on her nightgown, her hands trembled. She lowered the quilt. Elias was staring into the fire, jaw tight, hands fisted on his knees. He had not touched her. That night, she did not reach for the shotgun. The days grew colder, but clearer. Then she told him about Amos, about the debts, about Silas Croft, about the deal her husband had almost made. Croft would forgive the debt in exchange for the land and for her. "Winter tenancy of Clara," she said flatly. That's what he called it. Elias's jaw hardened. The rifle parts in his hands snapped together with quiet finality. "Has Croft been back?" he asked. "Not yet." "He will." She nodded. They both knew it. The next storm trapped them inside for 3 days. The cabin turned bitter cold despite the fire. Elias gave her the warmer space near the hearth and took the drafty floor. She heard it in the dark, the faint clicking of his teeth. He was shaking. She lay there for a long time. Then she rose. She carried her thickest quilt to him and spread it over his shoulders. He tried to protest. "Be quiet," she ordered. Then she did something neither of them expected. She lay down beside him, not touching, close enough to share warmth. 2 separate bodies under one quilt. The shaking stopped. Neither of them slept. The next evening, by the fire, Elias reached out and tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her neck. The touch was gentle. It broke her. She jerked back as if burned. "Don't!" she whispered. She fled to her cot, trembling with shame and something far more dangerous. Before dawn, she was outside splitting wood like a woman possessed, swinging the maul again and again, trying to beat the hunger out of her chest. Elias came to her. "Clara, stop! What do you care?" she snapped. He took the maul from her hands without force, and she collapsed. Sobs tore from her. "I'm so alone," she choked. "I'm tired of just surviving." He did not rush her, did not grab her. He offered his hand. She took it. That night, the distance between them finally broke. He knelt in front of her, took her hands in his. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Me too," he said. He did not claim her. He asked. The kiss that followed was slow, careful, nothing like the bruising demands she had known before. This was different. This was thaw. When he finally held her, it was not possession. It was shelter. And for the first time since Amos died, Clara did not sleep alone. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The peace did not last. It never does in the high country. Clara woke before dawn to find Elias sitting by the fire, already dressed, staring into the embers like a man counting sins. "I shouldn't have stayed," he said without turning. "I bring trouble." She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and stepped closer. "You bring work. You bring warmth. That's what you bring." He finally looked at her. "My name isn't just Elias," he said. "It's on a warrant in Wyoming. I was a bounty hunter. I hunted men. One of them was innocent. I killed him anyway." The words landed heavy. He told her about Sheriff Barlow, about corruption, about blood money, about running. "There's a price on my head," he finished. "If they find me here, they won't spare you." Clara did not step back. "You think you marked me?" she asked quietly. "I was marked the day I married Amos. You didn't bring danger. It was already here." The next week, a letter arrived. Silas Croft was filing a claim of abandonment. 30 days to appear in town and pay $40 in taxes. Money she did not have. "He's stealing it," she whispered. Elias's jaw tightened. "You fight it." "He owns the land office," she said. "He owns the bank. He owns half the town." "Then I'll go. You'll be arrested the moment you step inside." They argued until silence swallowed the room. At dawn, she found him packing his mule. "You're leaving," she said. "I'll draw them away," he answered. "If I stay, I destroy you." She walked to him, took his hand, led him back inside. "I was surviving before you," she whispered. "Now I'm alive. Don't take that away." He crushed her against him. "They will come," he warned. "Let them." He stayed, and they made their stand. Elias rode to town anyway, trying to delay Croft's filing. He bribed the clerk with 2 of the prime pelts. That was when Sheriff Barlow walked into the land office. Recognition flashed. Gunfire followed. Elias barely escaped town alive. By evening, 2 of Croft's hired men rode to the cabin. They stepped inside without invitation. Boone reached for her hair. Clara did not hesitate. She fired the shotgun into the floor, inches from his boot. Splinters tore into his leg. "Next one goes in your belly," she said coldly. They fled. When Elias returned, breathless and hunted, he told her the worst. "Barlow is here. He saw me." The next morning, 8 riders came out of the tree line. Barlow, Croft, hired guns. They surrounded the cabin. "You have 10 seconds," Croft shouted. "Vacate or we burn it." A shot shattered the window. Elias shoved Clara down as bullets tore through the walls. He fired back. Then he grunted. Blood poured from his thigh. She dragged him behind the hearth as splinters rained down. Smoke, gunfire, screams. They were losing. Clara's mind sharpened. She grabbed Amos's old oil can and slipped through the pantry door. Bullets chased her across the snow. She reached the shed and doused the hay. The flame exploded upward. Black smoke rolled across the valley, blinding the attackers. Inside, Elias used the cover to shoot one man. Then, Boone. Then he collapsed. Clara ran back. He was pale, fading. Barlow shouted from outside. "He's down!" New thunder shook the valley. Horses. Abner Potts, her neighbor, and 6 armed ranch hands rode hard into the clearing. Rifles leveled. Croft and Barlow retreated under fire. Justice followed in town. The clerk confessed. Croft and Barlow were tried and sentenced. Elias testified. He confessed his own crimes in open court. The warrant against him remained active. The marshal gave him 24 hours. At sunset, Elias saddled his mule. Clara stood in the road. "You come back," she said. Not pleading, commanding. He nodded once and rode south. Months passed. The thaw came. Clara rebuilt, sold the remaining pelts, bought hens, seed, a piglet. She was no longer a widow waiting to be claimed. She was the owner of her land. One day, a letter arrived. 3 sentences. "I am here. They are not. I think of the hearth." He was alive. Spring returned. The new barn stood tall against the green hills. Clara stacked hay in the loft when a shadow fell across the door. A man stepped inside. Clean-shaven. Strong. Scarred but standing straight. The eyes were the same. "My name is John now," he said quietly. "The warrant died with Barlow. I'm free." She stared at him, then crossed the barn in 3 strides and struck his chest with her palm. "You're late." Then she kissed him, not in desperation, not in fear, but in certainty. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the loft. Sunlight poured through the slats in golden beams. He laid his head against her chest and let out a breath that sounded like a man finally home. "One night," he murmured softly, "for 10 furs." Clara smiled and ran her fingers through his hair. "You offered 10 furs," she whispered, "but I gave you far more. And this time," he stayed.